Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's D-Zone webinar, DataOps in 2026, Connecting Data Orchestration to Business Outcomes for Proving ROI. My name is Faith Day, and I'll be your host. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest challenges that data teams face, proving the business value of their work. If you've ever struggled to translate pipeline performance, Airflow metrics, or platform improvements into language that resonates with executives, you're in the right place. Today, we're thrilled to have Ashley Kewillam, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Astronomer here with us. Ashley brings deep expertise in data orchestration, observability, and helping teams connect their technical outcomes to measurable business impact. But before we get started, a few quick housekeeping notes. For one, this session is being recorded, and we'll send the recording and slides after the event. Please put any comments that you might have in the chat, and you can also submit questions at any time using the Q&A panel, and we're going to address as many of them as we can at the end. With that, let's jump in. Ashley, I'll hand things over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Faith. Hi, everyone. I'm Ashley Kewillam, and thank you for joining me today for our webinar exploring how organizations can connect their data ops and orchestration practices to real business outcomes and improve ROI. As Faith mentioned, I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at Astronomer, which is the commercial provider behind Apache Airflow, the leading data orchestration tool trusted by thousands of data-driven companies. So with that, we can jump into our content. Over the last decade, digital transformation has dramatically elevated the role of software engineers. Developers became central to how companies built new products, entered new markets, and modernized their customer experiences. And today, we're really entering the next major shift, the AI transformation. And it's doing the same thing for people who work with data. Data engineers, analytic engineers, platform teams, and data ops practitioners are becoming just as strategic as developers were in the last era. Because innovation today is no longer just about writing code. It's about how well an organization can use its data, combining both proprietary data and open data. So whether you're looking to implement AI, personalization, fraud detection, supply chain optimization, you name the use case, none of these work without reliable, accessible, trustworthy data. So when we say data underpins the most critical digital initiatives, we're talking about the backbone for your entire innovation strategy. And this is where things get real. Success in AI and data-driven products isn't just about having data. It's about the operational capability to get the right data to the right place at the right time, consistently, reliably, and with governance. That means high quality data delivered on schedule, flowing through pipelines that can be trusted not to break the exact moment the business needs them. And this is why data ops is becoming a strategic function. If data isn't delivered reliably, insights stall, automations break, customer experiences degrade, and AI models can fail. The organizations that win in this era will be the ones that operationalize this flow of data, not just store it. But the reality is this is really hard, right? This stat on the slide here comes from MIT, and it's one of the clearest signals of what's happening in the industry right now. Most Gen AI pilots never make it to measurable business impact. Even if you dispute this number, there's plenty of evidence showing that 70% plus failure rates for AI initiatives. But why is that? What's interesting is that these failures rarely happen because the model wasn't good enough. The breakthroughs in foundation models now mean that the models are incredibly capable. The failures often happen before the model ever gets a chance to prove its value. It happens because the organization didn't have reliable data pipelines, consistent data quality, clear lineage and governance, or the operational scaffolding needed to support continuous training and inference. If we look under the hood of most organizations today, this is often what we see. A patchwork of data processing and scheduling systems, each added over time by different teams, all to solve one narrow problem. The end result is fragmentation, teams stitching together their own combinations of tools because there's no unified orchestration layer. That creates three systematic issues. The first, fragmented workflows. Pipelines are handed off across systems that don't communicate well. That slows down delivery and makes changes risky. The second, unreliable data. When you have 10 plus systems involved in producing a data product, you get frequent errors, stale dashboards, and brittle applications downstream. And lastly, you're left with observability blind spots. You may know something broke, but not what, where, or why. This is where you see runaway infrastructure costs, wasted compute, and long time to resolution for incidents. And this is exactly the type of problem that DataOps is promised to solve. Gartner defines DataOps as, collaborative practice focused on improving communication, automation, observability, and the operation of data flows across the organization, and predicts that by 2026, data engineering teams that adopt mature DataOps practices and supporting tools will be 10 times more productive than those that don't. That tenfold gap isn't about hiring more people or spending more on infrastructure. It's about working smarter. Teams with mature DataOps frameworks spend less time firefighting and more time delivering new data products, analytics, and AI capabilities. Think about what we just saw on the previous slide. The patchwork of schedulers, scripts, and manual processes that slow teams down. DataOps replaces that patchwork with consistency, visibility, and automation, where you can observe, orchestrate, and trust every step of your data pipeline. You remove friction across teams and enable continuous delivery of reliable data. That's the productivity multiplier that Gartner is referring to. And it's the foundation for everything else we'll talk about today, how orchestration, observability, and culture really combine to deliver measurable business outcomes. But for many people, DataOps can still feel like a loaded term or even a buzzword. So before we go deeper, let's just take a step back and look at what this actually looks like in practice. When you look across the most demanding engineering teams, something interesting shows up. No matter the industry, no matter the scale, the organizations that succeed treat orchestration as the connective tissue running through everything they do with data. Think about the range of workloads teams manage. For AI and ML, orchestration can power every step of the pipeline, like ingest, cleaning, feature engineering, training, retraining, evaluation, and monitoring. Or for analytics and BizOps, it coordinates, validation, enrichment, aggregation, and that continuous monitoring as well. These are completely different use cases, but they depend on the same underlying capability, a reliable way to move data through a supply chain of tasks, systems, and teams. And that's really the heart of DataOps. It's the discipline of managing that end-to-end flow in a consistent, governed, observable, and automated way. So while DataOps is the discipline, orchestration is the structural backbone that makes DataOps real. It's the layer that ensures tasks happen in the right order, with the right dependencies, in the right environment, with the right data. Without orchestration, every team ends up creating its own processes, its own triggers, its own recovery logic, and its own way of stitching together systems. That's what leads to that fragmentation and brittleness we talked about earlier. With orchestration, you can replace that ad hoc complexity with a single, consistent source of truth for how your pipelines run, clear dependencies and sequencing, shared operational standards, unified monitoring alerting, and a governance model that spans across teams. Orchestration becomes the connective layer that turns a messy set of tools into a coherent data platform. And as organizations take on more real-time workloads, more AI systems, and more distributed architectures, orchestration shifts from being a convenience to becoming a requirement. It's the foundation that allows DataOps to scale, and the only way to ensure that data delivery is predictable, observable, and resilient across the business. From financial services and enterprise software to consumer platforms, global logistics providers, and frontier AI companies, there's really a consistent pattern among those organizations who are operating at this massive scale. The first, they take an orchestration-first approach, treating orchestration as a first-class architectural pillar of their data platform. And the second, for many of them, that orchestration layer is Apache Airflow. These organizations run tens of thousands of workflows, billions of events, petabytes of data movement, and have deeply cross-functional workloads that span analytics, machine learning, real-time operations. But despite the diversity in their use cases and environments, the same theme shows up again and again. They rely on a robust orchestration layer for reliability, scalability, and predictability. They aren't getting trapped in the patchwork of isolated schedulers. Instead, they're really centralizing that coordination, sequencing, dependency management, and monitoring so teams can operate with confidence. And this isn't just a technology choice. It's really an operating model choice. It's one of the clearest differentiators between organizations that can scale data delivery across the entire company and those that can't. And based on the work that we've done at Astronomer across the Airflow ecosystem over the years, we've really seen this orchestration first pattern emerge consistently across organizations of all sizes and industries. So the natural question really is, how do organizations actually progress toward that orchestration first model we just discussed? What we've observed across dozens of organizations is that they follow a very consistent progression. And that's what this data velocity curve you're seeing here represents. It shows how the time it takes to turn data into business value decreases as orchestration becomes more unified, more automated, and more embedded across the company. I'd love to get a sense of where you are all at on this curve. So we're going to put up a quick poll. If you can just take a few minutes to answer that, that would be much appreciated. While that's running, though, I'll continue to kind of talk through what we're seeing here. So if you look at this curve, most teams really begin with relatively basic automation, simply replacing manual time-based processes with orchestrated workflows. Even this first step increases flexibility and pipeline resiliency because the work is no longer tied to brittle scripts or isolated tools. From there, organizations can then move toward unifying that orchestration across teams. Instead of every department building and managing workflows in their own way, there's a shared platform to build, run, and observe all workflows in a shared operating model. This is where companies see major gains: faster development and deployment of data products, improved reliability and performance, better cost control, and end-to-end visibility for governance and quality. And as orchestration becomes standardized company-wide, organizations can then reach that accelerate stage, which we're seeing all the way in the right, where data becomes broadly accessible, workflows become reusable, and new use cases come online much faster. This is also where AI becomes easier to operationalize. When you have consistent patterns and unified orchestration, you can plug in AI-driven engineering, automated quality checks, and cross-enterprise data activation without multiplying complexity. The point of this curve is simple. The more unified your orchestration strategy, the faster and more reliably your organization can turn data into value. So once you understand where you sit on the data velocity curve, the next question really becomes, how do you actually move up the curve? The organizations that mature the fastest and see the strongest ROI do two things in parallel. They evolve their culture and they evolve their technology. You can't get the full benefit of a unified orchestration strategy with technology alone. And you also can't rely on culture alone if the underlying tools can't support that scale, visibility, and governance that's needed. So it's really the combination of both that creates that acceleration that we're aiming for. So let's start with the cultural side, because this is where most organizations feel the friction. First, you need to align with business priorities. Data teams really can't operate in isolation. Success comes from deeply understanding the KPIs and outcomes that your stakeholders care about, whether that's revenue targets, supply chain efficiency, customer experience, or AI model performance. Second, you need to reframe the value you deliver to the business. Technical metrics like pipeline uptime, task duration, resource utilization really matter internally. But to earn investment and trust, you have to translate those metrics into business impact. Reduce risk, lower costs, faster time to insight, and increase operational reliability. And third, you need to treat data as a product. That means defining ownership, SLAs, documentation, quality expectations, and lifecycle management in the same way that a software team would. Organizations that make these cultural shifts early on progress up the curve significantly faster than those who just treat data ops purely as a technical problem. For data practitioners, one of the biggest cultural shifts is learning to translate those technical signals into business outcomes. Data teams tend to measure things like pipeline uptime, task duration, error counts, resource utilization, data freshness, and these are all incredibly important internally. They help us understand how our systems are performing. But the reality is, this is not how business leaders think. They're asking questions like, is unreliable data hurting revenue or slowing growth? Where are we reducing costs through better efficiency? Are we mitigating operational or compliance risk? Are we enabling teams to move faster and make better decisions? So reframing value is about taking those technical indicators we track every day and expressing them in terms that matter to executives, like speed, cost, risk, or productivity. But if those technical metrics don't automatically translate into business value, the next step to getting there is really understanding how to bridge that gap. Inside data engineering, we focus on things like freshness, accuracy, completeness, throughput, reliability, all those things we just talked about. And to us, those are the foundational signals that tell us whether our systems are healthy. But the business doesn't measure success in the same way. So we need to do a better job of understanding what our business stakeholders' key KPIs and objectives are, and how are the data pipelines you develop can support them. Because while you focus on data quality, uptime, or throughput, business teams live in a completely different world. They're accountable for those outcomes like revenue growth, customer retention, operational efficiency, margin improvements, or even reduced risk, often with a lot of external pressures and not really a lot of direct control over the inputs. So when data isn't accurate, or a pipeline fails, or a data set arrives late, the impact is felt in missed forecasts, in delayed campaigns, slower customer resolution times, or model performance, or stalled operational decisions. So alignment really starts by understanding the stakes. Who are your stakeholders? What are they responsible for? What decisions do they need to make? What metrics determine their success or failure? And when you understand that context, you can then design data assets that genuinely support those goals. And you can articulate the impact when something breaks. Some teams, formalize this by organizing around domain teams like sales, finance, marketing, or customer support. And there are pros and cons to that model. You may have too much decentralization in your data team, which can lead to fragmented tooling. But ultimately, deeper domain knowledge often leads to a stronger alignment and more trusted data. So once you start speaking that shared language, everything becomes easier: prioritization, road mapping, investment, and ultimately demonstrating ROI. And this brings us naturally to the next idea, thinking about data not just as pipelines or tables, but as something with users, expectations, and lifecycle management. Once you understand your end users and their use cases, you can then define those SLAs, KPIs, and success criteria, just like any other product team would. Then you model and build your pipelines, document those dependencies, and make the product discoverable so teams can use it confidently. You add quality gates and test, version and publish changes, and you support, measure, and iterate just like a software product. This shift dramatically reduces fire drills because ownership becomes clear, expectations are explicit, and quality is built right into the lifecycle rather than bolted on afterward. And organizations who adopt this mindset really see better reliability, faster delivery, and ultimately a far clearer alignment between data teams and their business users. And all of this really becomes the foundation for the ROI framework we're about to walk through next. So now that we've talked about that cultural alignment, understanding your stakeholders, reframing that value, treating data as a product, the next question becomes, how do you actually justify your investments in data ops? And the reality really is it ultimately depends on where you are in your maturity. What ROI may look like when you're moving off of cron jobs is very different from what it looks like when you're unifying orchestration across teams or accelerating those advanced analytics and AI use cases. That's why having a structured framework to evaluate ROI at each stage of your journey becomes so important. So here, this is a really simple framework to help you in that journey. The first step, as I mentioned, is really identifying where you are on that velocity curve that we walk through, because ultimately your maturity stage will determine the kind of value you can actually unlock in the immediate future. The second, you need to establish your baseline, understand how things are working today, your level of failures, time spent firefighting, costs, delays, current SLA adherence, time to insight. You need this baseline to show that real improvement. The third is setting stage-appropriate targets. Early stage teams may see ROI from reducing manual effort and increasing reliability. Mid-stage teams may see ROI from unifying tooling and governance. And advanced teams see ROI from scale, speed, and unblocking AI initiatives. And step 4 is communicating value in business terms, like we discussed, really looping back to that cultural work, translating your improvements into cost reduction, risk mitigation, and faster time to market, not just pipeline uptime or task duration. So this framework helps us ensure that no matter where you start, you can articulate ROI in a way that resonates with your leadership. So let's go through each phase of the curve, since we mentioned it is different depending where you're at. So let's start with phase 1 for organizations who are moving off of rigid, fragmented cron jobs and schedulers. We'll start with this automate phase of the curve. And this is where many organizations really begin, moving away from those manual processes into a more predictable orchestration model. A big part of this early phase is really making the case to modernize in the first place. Many organizations are still dependent on the schedulers and tooling that were built decades ago, systems that are ultimately designed for batch processing in a much simpler world. But over time, what once was good enough has now become a major bottleneck. Legacy schedulers come with familiar problems for, I'm sure, many of you, like technical debt, custom scripts, duct tape logic, and systems no one wants to touch. A lack of flexibility, even small changes in these systems may end up taking days or weeks. There's scale limitations. Modern workloads outgrow these older architectures, and there's really no observability. So when something breaks, it often becomes very unclear where or why those failures occurred. And these constraints really slow down innovation across the entire business, not just within engineering itself. But modern orchestration gives teams the ability to move quickly, adapt to change, and build workflows that are easier to maintain and troubleshoot, which directly affects the speed at which organizations can deliver those insights, data products, and AI capabilities. So what does ROI actually look like at this early stage? It's important to keep expectations grounded because the gains here may tend to be more operational, but they're still meaningful. So the first measurement you can look at is things like TCO savings. When you move off of scheduling tools or sprawling collections of scripts and cron jobs, you may dramatically reduce that maintenance time, right? Many teams recover hours per week that used to be spent just babysitting those pipelines or troubleshooting and fixing failures. Second, you have reliability improvements. You can now measure this in reduced failure rates, fewer after-hours incidents, and clearer visibility into where those issues occur. And the third is innovation speed. Before, deploying a new workflow might take some days or weeks because processes were fragile or highly manual. And after, in the new world, deployments may become much faster, safer, and more standardized. At this stage, ROI is mostly about reducing that manual toil, increasing pipeline reliability, and unlocking engineering capacity for new work. And all of these improvements stack. They set the foundation for much bigger gains as you move into those next phases. And a great example we've seen at Astronomer from this modernization is Autodesk, one of our customers. They were dealing with really slow, risky release cycles and fragmented environments, challenges many teams recognize. Their pipelines were powered by an older scheduler that made testing and deploying changes very time-consuming and brittle. And by moving to a standardized orchestration platform on Airflow, they were able to accelerate deployment cycles by 33%, reduce tech debt by 60%, and improve data quality by 90%. With standardized orchestration and better environment management, the team gained confidence in their workflows, they reduced errors, and ultimately moved faster. Exactly the kind of gains you'd expect to see. And once organizations see these improvements, they're ready to take on the next step in the curve, moving from that automation to true unification. So once you've stabilized your pipelines, the next major step is unifying orchestration across teams and workloads. And this phase is really about moving away from everyone managing workflows in their own siloed way and instead adopting that shared foundation for how pipelines are built, run, and observed. This brings consistency, clarity, and ultimately a lot more predictability. And here's why unifying orchestration really matters, right? With a unified approach, you get a single control plane for how data workflows are built, run, and observed. That means teams aren't reinventing patterns or operating in silos. They're using that consistent, reliable foundation. It also gives you trusted data delivery because every workflow follows the same standards for quality, governance, and timing. And you get 360-degree observability. So instead of monitoring pipelines, one by one, you have visibility across your entire ecosystem: performance, cost, lineage, SLAs, the downstream impact of failures. This is where orchestration really shifts from just a workflow tool to a true operational backbone of your business. And ROI in this phase goes beyond individual pipelines and really starts showing up at the organizational level. Your observability improves, meaning you have fewer surprises, faster resolution, and the ability to prevent issues before they impact the business. Governance strengthens. You know which pipelines matter and who depends on them and what happens if something breaks. Your delivery speed increases because teams now use shared patterns and consistent deployment models instead of managing workflows in multiple different ways. And finally, costs become easier to control because resources, patterns, and tools are consolidated rather than scattered across teams. This is the phase that really creates real momentum, and organizations tend to see compounding benefits as more teams begin to adopt this unified model. And a great example we've seen here is from one of the world's leading shipping container companies. They were facing things like delayed executions, limited visibility, and scaling challenges with their previous orchestration setup, issues that ultimately put their critical analytics pipelines at risk. After moving to a unified orchestration approach with observability built in, they gained immediate visibility into their data product SLAs, improved pipeline reliability, and were able to proactively detect and resolve issues without needing to ultimately build and staff a totally separate 24/7 support function, which is what they were looking at prior. So their result to switching to this model was really faster time to value, stronger data quality, and a clear return on their investment, with payback measured in weeks, not months. And this 450% that you see on this slide is ultimately the ROI they calculated from having to potentially staff a completely separate support function, like I mentioned earlier, or just leveraging this built-in observability that they were able to gain when moving to a unified platform. And that's really the kind of operational lift you expect to see when organizations move from those siloed models to a more unified model with observability built in. All right, let's move on now to the last phase, which is all about leveraging these benefits to scale adoption across the business critical workflows, from analytics, ETL, AI, ML, all on a single platform versus multiple point solutions. At this stage, the value of orchestration really compounds because more teams are using shared patterns, working from shared visibility, and benefiting from the same governance and reliability model. This is a phase where orchestration stops just being a platform decision and starts becoming more of that company-wide enabler of speed, trust, and ultimately innovation. And when orchestration really scales across the enterprise, we see four major benefits start to reinforce each other. The first is those cost per workflow decreases. You're no longer maintaining separate tooling stacks or rebuilding the same patterns in multiple places. Shared infrastructure drives economies of scale, ultimately. Second is the time to deploy new use cases really drops significantly. Teams are building on the same patterns, which means less reinventing, fewer surprises, and much faster iteration. And third, knowledge sharing increases. Teams can see how others solve similar problems, reuse components, and standardize best practices. And the fourth, visibility into your data health really improves. With consistent orchestration and observability, it becomes much easier to understand the quality and reliability of the data you have powering analytics or AI and operational systems. And that lack of trust in the data is no longer a blocker to new initiatives. So as we've mentioned, these benefits really do compound the more teams adopt and the faster everyone moves. And this is really where organizations start to see the biggest enterprise level impact. You may look at things like tool consolidation, right? Before you have multiple teams, each running their own schedulers or orchestration tools, their own observability tools and workflow systems, which becomes, expensive, it's inconsistent and ultimately hard to govern. And moving to this unified model by consolidating onto one orchestration layer helps reduce licensing costs, infrastructure overhead, and operational complexity. giving you that result of much lower total cost of ownership and fewer tools to maintain. So giving you ultimately those licensing cost savings, hopefully, and much less complexity. And the second, there's also platform scaling economics, like we mentioned. So before, onboarding a new team or workflow required maybe a completely bespoke setup and duplicated effort. And after, now with unified standards, the marginal cost of adding new teams or workloads drops really dramatically, giving you that exponential value without linear cost growth. So for many organizations, this is the stage where orchestration directly accelerates AI and ML use cases, because data becomes more trusted, more predictable, and more accessible across the enterprise. So we've spent a lot of time now talking about those cultural foundations and the ROI framework getting up to this point, but the technology foundation really does matter just as much. So while we've been discussing orchestration the entire time, the reality is that choosing the right orchestration platform is one of the most important decisions in your data ops journey. There are really many tools on the market, but as we mentioned, Apache Airflow has remained the de facto standard, adopted by some of the most innovative companies in the world, including teams building those frontier AI and foundation models at organizations like Anthropic and OpenAI. And that's because Airflow gives teams the flexibility, transparency, and ecosystem depth needed to support modern data and AI workloads at scale. And if you're looking for a way to offload the management burdens of Airflow, Astronomer offers Astro, our unified data ops platform, which is built on top of Apache Airflow. It's really designed to make it easier for teams to build, run, and observe their data workloads at scale. So on the build side, teams get a really consistent development environment with versioning, CI/CD, support for modern patterns like AI-powered pipeline authoring, so pipelines can be authored and deployed faster and with confidence. On the run side, the platform handles all the operational heavy lifting for you: the scaling, the reliability, multi-team isolation, security, and cross-cloud deployments, so workflows stay performant and predictable. And on the observe side, Astro provides the end-to-end visibility into pipeline health, cost, lineage, SLAs, and anomalies, which is all essential for maintaining trust in the data powering analytics, operations, and AI. So the goal of our platform is really simple. It's to give data teams that foundation to support the entire data lifecycle, from development and deployment to monitoring and governance, all without any added complexity. And the last point I'll make here is that technology alone really isn't enough. Moving up the data velocity curve is ultimately a journey, and it often requires things like guidance, best practices, enablement, and ultimately a partner who understands how to operationalize orchestration at scale. So whether you're moving from schedulers to a functional orchestration setup, consolidating workflows across teams, or really scaling your orchestrations tooling enterprise-wide, the right partner can help you avoid common pitfalls and ultimately help you accelerate time to value. For us at Astronomer, that means supporting organizations at every stage, from those migrations and onboarding to governance, scaling, and ultimately adopting advanced use cases. The goal is to not just give teams a tool, but to help them build those repeatable, scalable operating models to truly unlock the full value of data ops. And really, regardless of where you are in your journey, it's also important to make sure you're leveraging any available vendor tooling as well to help you evaluate that potential ROI of your investments. So if you're interested in Astronomer as a potential partner, you can dig deeper into the benefits of Astro with our TCO calculator, which you can find right at the QR code here. And it's really designed to help teams really quickly and easily estimate their operational savings, efficiency gains, cost reductions that come from moving along this velocity curve that we talked about. So whether you're modernizing from a scheduler tool, unifying orchestration onto one platform, or scaling to support more use cases like AI, this will help you, really quickly start to see what those potential gains may look like. And it's completely optional, but it can be a helpful way to quantify the impact and begin to build really a stronger internal business case. All right, so with that, I No, I talked for about 30 minutes or so. So I'm really happy you all have been spending this time with us today, and we covered a lot, but I want to open it back up to Q&A. So I'll hand it over to Faith to go ahead and kick us off.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ashley, for your excellent walkthrough of how teams can move beyond those traditional technical metrics and really articulate the business value behind their orchestration strategies. And as you mentioned, we're now going to transition into Q&A. So if you haven't already, feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A panel, and I will pull that up and we'll get started. So the first question that we have for you today is, what's the first step organizations should take if they want to better connect their data work to real business outcomes?
Yeah, thanks, Faith. That's a great question, and one that we see lots of customers kind of asking, who we partner with as well. And it ultimately really ties back to understanding your stakeholders, like we talked about. It's really incredibly important to know your customer. In the case of the data team, it's other functions in your organization, whether it's your marketing team, finance, or customer support. We work with a lot of customers actually who follow more of an embedded model, where data engineers embed onto a stakeholder team and solve a specific problem alongside that team rather than building something in isolation. And this seems to work really well because you know immediately what problem you're solving and how to tackle that. But ultimately, regardless of the exact model you follow, whether that might work for you or not, becoming a subject matter expert in the business level problems you're trying to solve beyond just those technical tooling choices is really incredibly important to be able to start tying the work that you do back to how it's driving those business outcomes.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Ashley. And so it looks like we have another question that is talking a bit more about quantification. And so it says, how do you get executive buy-in for DataOps modernization when budgets or headcount are a little bit tight?
Yeah, this is a great one as well, and certainly a challenge that comes up a lot. I think the key here is really to make sure you're speaking the same language as the business. Executives don't get excited about technical metrics. They really do respond, though, to things like the cost of manual firefighting or the risk of unreliable data, the opportunity cost of slow delivery, if it's blocking critical strategic initiatives at the top level. So when you show that modernization really helps, reduce that operational drag or prevent downstream business failures, and ultimately can free up capacity for higher value work, your conversation is able to shift from technology spend to driving business ROI. It's also important to rely on available tools like we mentioned, or other customer case studies and proof, and your technology partner as well to help you build out that internal business case rather than going at the problem alone. So you can really show where maybe things like even services expertise could also accelerate time to value and truly unblock those critical business initiatives. And when we see our customers doing things like that, it really does change the conversation and become much less about the technology spend, which is what will help you ultimately justify that investment.
Thanks. And that's a perfect lead-in to what I think is our last question. And it says, in what ways does better data and pipeline observability help teams connect technical performance to business impact and ROI?
Yeah, this is a great one as well. I think observability is really one of the most important aspects of understanding business impact at the end of the day. Because without it, it's almost impossible for a data team to really understand and communicate the true business impact of what they do. So without observability, you may know that one of your pipelines failed, but you don't know which downstream impact was impacted, which downstream team was impacted, how it may have affected revenue, the customer experience, or maybe an AI model's performance. But when you have observability in place, you can see things like your SLA compliance and on-time delivery. You can trace lineage and understand things like dependencies upstream and downstream. You can detect anomalies much faster before they hit consumers, attribute cost to specific workflows or domains and understand the real impact of failure or delay may have on the business. And having that visibility is exactly what you need in order to tie things like reliability and performance back to those business outcomes. Communicating things like reduced mean time to repair, avoided incidents, or more reliable pipelines. So ultimately, having observability in place really sets the foundation to give you that visibility in order to quantify your ROI, really at every stage of maturity. And it turns things like this pipeline ran successfully into, we prevented a revenue impacting incident, or we were able to deliver our insights faster to support a very strategic decision or a new use case, which will help you communicate the business impact of your work in a much easier way.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ashley. Observability and governance are definitely big topics right now. And so we appreciate you for sharing this clear and actionable framework with our viewers. And of course, thanks to everyone who joined us live today. If there's one thing that you can take with you, it should be this. DataOps ROI becomes measurable the moment that you're able to tie pipeline performance directly to business outcomes like revenue, efficiency, and also risk reduction. And so after this, we'll send a follow-up email shortly with the recording, slides, and any additional resources so you can continue exploring some of these concepts. And Ashley, if you would like to share any final calls to action or resources for our attendees, please feel free to go ahead.
Yeah, ultimately, just thank you for spending the time here with us today. And if anyone, like I mentioned, is interested in exploring some of the tools that we have at Astronomer, looking for ways to try to calculate ROI, go ahead and scan this code here. We have a really great calculator that's pretty easy just to give you high-level understanding. So you can always explore that if you're looking for tools to start understanding how you can communicate that value. But yeah, thank you so much for spending the time here with us today. I hope you found some of the content valuable. And yeah, we look forward to continuing the conversation with you if you're interested.
And thanks again to you for spending your time with us and also sharing your resources. And to the audience, we hope to see you at another D-Zone event soon. Have a great day.